Hello and you're welcome to the Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler, in association with Square. Square can help with your business needs from menu management and online ordering to payments. Visit square.com for more. Now, what's next for Apple? Who's the next CEO going to be? Are they still working on a car? Are they facing trouble in China? And will its mixed reality headset be a success? Well, Stuart Miles, a journalist and founder of the price comparison platform Squirrel, is joining me again. Stuart, you're welcome, as always, to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, Stuart, we know or we suspect that there are a few of the typical updates that Apple are organizing over the next few months, late 2023, maybe early 2024, maybe a 13-inch MacBook Pro with an M3 chip, updated MacBook Air models, an M3 Mac Mini, MacBook Pros, and then obviously the big one, which we'll get to, is the Apple Vision Pro early next year. But stepping back for a second and looking at some of the big picture items, it occurred to me, you and I were both there at the iPhone launch, the iPhone 15 launch in California, and we were just having a chat about who we thought maybe the next CEO of Apple might be. What's the current thinking on that, do you think?
Well, I think there's quite a lot of people that would like the job. There's probably quite a few people that wouldn't necessarily like the job. And then obviously on top of that, you have people that would be good for the job and then people that want the job but probably wouldn't be great.
Yeah.
Apple has got a very strong senior leadership team. You've got people like Craig Ferlinghi. You've got Luca Mastrari from the CFO. And you've even got people like Eddie Q, who've been around for a long time and now running up the services division. I think the money's probably on Jeff Williams, who's the COO. He's taken over quite a lot of responsibilities over the last couple of years, which would probably put him in good stead to kind of have that overarching sort of feel for the business and the different parts of the business. You've also got to remember that Tim Cook was the COO before he took over from.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of those, in politics, you always kind of think, oh, has he been foreign secretary? Yes, that's probably a big tick in that sort of sense. And in this instance, has he been the COO? Yes. Okay, that's probably a very big tick.
And I remember when Tim Cook took over from Steve Jobs, and at the time, I remember some skepticism around it because Cook definitely didn't have the charisma that Jobs did. And you sort of get the same feeling about Jeff Williams, don't you? I mean, he was shoehorned into some of the key sections of the big Apple launches earlier this month. And I wouldn't describe him as the most energetic or most charismatic figure in front of the camera, but maybe that doesn't matter.
No, I think what Tim Cook has proved to us over the last couple of years as the head of Apple is that ultimately, like Steve Jobs was an amazing marketeer, right? He just, had that vision, had that excitement, had the ability to get people excited, all the other stuff. But Tim Cook's actually come in and transformed Apple to be the huge behemoth from a financial and successful results-driven business that it is today. Steve Jobs, for everything that he did great, was probably from a business perspective, was probably seen to be quite scatty in that sense of not as sort of, how do you put it, kind of sort of boring.
Yeah, and he was hot-headed. Jobs was hot-headed as well, wasn't he? He would talk about, in his book, his Isaacson book, he had a real vendetta against Google, for example. He was convinced that Google was out to kill Apple, and he made sometimes decisions that maybe didn't reflect the kind of the calmness and the aura of medium to long-term thinking that Tim Cook has.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the way that Tim Cook's done it, he's reduced the supply chain. He's a master at that. Apple is making a lot of money every quarter and has continued to do so, and therefore it's the worth the trillions that it is today. Partly, obviously, it's a team effort, so to speak, but partly because of the decisions he's made. And so I think sometimes a safe pair of hands, which I suspect, as you say, Jeff Williams isn't the most exciting person around, but probably that safe pair of hands is what Tim Cook believes Apple needs to continue that growth and continue that, rather than having, the sort of showmanship of Jobs that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and Tim Cook, we should add, who is 63 or turning 63, I think we're expecting him to stay in place for another couple of years, 2025. From a financial perspective, he has about 1 million shares that will vest at that time. That's almost $200 million. So there's a good reason for him to stay until then. That's also maybe a nice time to see whether the Vision Pro, which is maybe his second or third main product, new product that he has introduced in his time at Apple, will either sink or swim. What do we think about that? You and I have talked before about the Vision Pro, the headset. What's the latest prognosis, do you think, on whether or not it's capturing the imagination or whether it might work?
So I think from a technological point of view, it's still the most advanced thing out there. It's still, for lack of a better word, magical in that sense of just it works and you're unsure of how it works and all those things. Since that time, I'm not sure whether you have, I've certainly had a chance to play with the Meta Quest 3, which is Meta's variation of that. It's a seventh of the price, but it's very obvious that it's a seventh of the price. You've got to use controllers, the materials aren't as nice, all those kind of things. And I think while that will probably be a lot more, the Meta Quest will be a lot more approachable for more people to experience and understand VR, I think that the Vision Pro will be, hard to be challenged from a technical point of view. The big question, and we had this every time we talk about this with you and I, is that kind of sense of what the sociological elements of this are and how we'll actually use it in the workplace or in the home. I thought it was really interesting. Meta chose to kind of focus around games, around exercise, around kind of my demo time with the Meta was very much in a room, bouncing around, joyful, playful experiences, where the Apple experience, when you and I both did the demo in Cupertino earlier in the year, was very much relaxed and timely, and it kind of you sit on the sofa and let things wash over you rather than you kind of jumping around like a lunatic.
It's amazing, isn't it? Apple has an ability to put a velvet layer over what could be something really dystopian to make this kind of calm, everyday experience to make it look apparent. I'm not sure if you saw, for example, Mark Zuckerberg's recent interview with Lex Friedman, where and it was kind of amazing, but it was also a little weird.
It was, I just thought it was, it doesn't, Lex is very kind of dry and kind of, that doesn't help. Some of the words that Mark was using, Zuckerberg was using of like, oh, I've choked you closer and things. They obviously did jiu-jitsu together. Just the sort of language and that kind of like ethereal kind of trippy kind of approach just is great if you're an engineer and you're really into that, but it's not a great way of marketing and selling a product to a wider audience that is still trying to get their heads around virtual reality and mixed reality and augmented reality. So I think Apple's clever in the way that, and it seems more so since we saw it, is that it's very much about a sort of, they talk about this spatial computing, but it feels more about that idea of letting it be a part of your workflow or your life, which I still think is a hard sell, putting this massive headset on your head and going from there. But the technology was good enough that I would happily, you could wear it and still believe that you're in the room, where the Meta Quest 3 technology was very, I could see that I was watching through a poor screen that I felt could be better, but it was obviously restricted by costs and hitting that price point. Yeah,
we shouldn't ignore, of course, as well, that we're expecting something that's going to cost between $3,000 and $4,000 to buy, plus potentially other subscription services or accessories. So there is that as well. One of the big things that has been talked about with regard to Apple and future products over the last decade has been this idea of a car. And the press has been obsessed with it. Now, the last year or two, the rumors and the discussion and the chatter have kind of died down a little bit over that. And, I see some of the analysts like Ming-Chi Kuo, who's one of the most prominent Apple analysts, saying that the Apple car has lost visibility at the current time. And others are saying, well, they might have actually abandoned their initial vision of an autonomous electric car. What do you think is likely to happen there?
I think I think cars are complicated, certainly today, and they're expensive, and there's a lot of excuse the pun, a lot of cogs in processing to make that work. I also, niggling at the back of my mind, believed that it was never about a car. Remember, probably about a decade ago, it was always Apple was going to make a TV. It was the Apple TV, and it wasn't the TV little box that they kind of have as a hobby. It was a full-blown TV, and that was everybody was dead certain that was going to happen, and it never did. And you then look back at those times and you think, well, maybe Apple was kind of playing around with the TV because they wanted to get into, and they were talking to lots of TV people because they wanted to get into TV production with like Apple TV Plus in the end, or maybe they wanted to understand how an app would work on all the operating systems for TV, so they could have that app that's not just a set-top box, but going in that way. And so there's a sort of sense in the back of my mind that says, well, if you're going to understand how a car works, to make that operating system for a car, and we saw that last year, didn't we, at WWDC? Their belief of CarPlay, the next iteration, it's kind of running the whole of the car. Then not only are you going to have to employ a load of car people, but you're also going to have to build some prototype cars so you can try and test this thing, because you can't necessarily retrofit a Range Rover or a Kia or something to work, to be the best solution for you. And we know from other experiences that Apple they don't like to do things by half. And so it's like, I'm sure, I think we've both been around, they're kind of, we're going to make headphones. So let's just build an entire building just to be able to test these headphones to make them work. So I wonder whether the idea of an Apple car is not actually the car, but it's to understand how the car works in a really great detail, and therefore to create an operating system which could be available on every car.
So that's an interesting, because I'm old enough to remember, you might remember this as well, in the 90s, there was a big debate about Apple clone PCs, whether Apple might license its operating system for machines that didn't use, that weren't built by it. And that ultimately, it ended up deciding against that. That would be interesting. I suppose it has done a little bit of that with Apple TV. It's a set-top box and it plugs into a regular TV. You would probably argue that Apple TV, the set-top box, is probably its least successful major product. And maybe it's because Apple doesn't build the TV. It would be interesting if that vision of Apple being the software brains of another manufacturer's car, something that Apple had no quality control over, other than the requirements for the OS. Be interesting if that happened.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly one way of looking at it. I think to tie into that, over the last 5 years, we've also seen very successfully from Apple's perspective this shift into services and understanding that you can make money. Once you're into the ecosystem, you can make a lot of money on people subscribing to your services, whether that's more storage, whether that's TV, whether that's fitness, or what have you. And I think we'll continue to see services like that continue to form, but also power, Apple's sort of business approach, not to move away from hardware. I don't think it's ever going to, that's not what I'm saying on that front, but that idea of, how can we add another $5 a month, 10 euros a month here, or whatever. And if you can get, anybody that drives a Tesla knows that there is a £10, I'm sure it's 10 euros probably in Ireland, but £10 a month subscription service for your car to allow you to get, Spotify or what have you. If suddenly, like Apple Pay or Apple Wallet and all those kind of things, you've suddenly got millions of customers around the world paying Apple $10 a month to use services in their car because they've spent the money to develop a really good operating system, that for Apple at this moment in time probably feels like a really, that's a couple of $1 billion business before you have to think about marketing it or doing anything else.
No, I think you're dead right. Do you think Apple will make a folding phone?
If they are, and I'm sure they've looked at it, we're not going to see it anytime soon. The way that the rumor mill works and the leaks and stuff, we would have had some bit of conversation
Yeah.
by now, I think. I think folding phones are still very much, I think they're still in their infancy. They are gaining popularity. There does seem to still be a very big talking point about it. It's got that ooh and wow moment when someone at the table pulls out normally a Samsung Galaxy Flip. That format, that old clamshell format, seems to be the more appealing to people.
I actually think that's the only one that, if you take it out in a pub, people will go, "Oh, what's that?" If you take out the Galaxy Fold, for example, or any of the larger ones, it doesn't really have the same effect. People they look at it like a Frankenstein device a little bit.
Yeah, and I think so. There's still an excitement about it, but the technology is still new. There's still concerns, I think, over the quality of the screen, and that fold line. Samsung comes out and says 200,000 folds, which sounds like, in reality, that's a lot. That's a lot of folds. But because it's a number, people go, "Oh, I might use it more than 200,000." I really open my phone a lot. What happens then? And and even still, you kind of, after a couple of weeks, you can still see that crease.
Yeah.
And I think for Apple, that just doesn't feel. It just feels like there's too many elements to go wrong, and so therefore, at the moment, I don't think they're gonna enter the market. That's not to say they won't ever. They're very good at adapting, but I also know that they kind of. When I was at the Vision Pro launch, talking to some of the senior Apple execs, they were like, "Well, it's going to keep us busy for the next decade," and not many companies think in 10-year cycles. And so if you think that they're already thinking that about the Vision Pro, then the reality is that the iPhone is already up to iPhone 25.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see whether a foldable does feature on that line.
Stuart Miles, journalist and founder of the price comparison platform Squirrel. Always a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you very much for explaining that so eloquently. And thanks also to JJ Clark, who produced today, to Conan Doherty on video, and to Gav Hennessy on sound. You've been watching or listening to The Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler, in association with Square. And we will talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.